All right, guys, welcome back to Mark Anthony's Music Picks, episode 82. Today, I'm excited for this episode because I'm going to be reviewing one of my favorite sort of eclectic, eccentric, oddity, techno labels, and that is Kimochi, also known as Kimochi Sound. Kimochi is run by a producer named Area that has been around for probably at least 10 years now, releasing really abstract, interesting, unique techno with a lot of non-typical, non-standard elements. And because there's non-standard elements used in it, you just end up with these really wild creations that sometimes turn out great and sometimes you're not sure about them. And maybe you take one of the tracks and you play it for a few people and one person loves it and the other one hates it. So it's sort of this very interesting dynamic that the label creates where you're like, even listening to the same EP, you might find that you love two of the tracks and three of the tracks, you're just like, oh, I'm not feeling that. But it's always interesting. And I will say, if you find yourself shopping through modern records and you feel like, oh, this is just another tech house record, this is just another straight up house record that's using drum machines, right? And you feel like you can like very easily pin down what you're listening to and you're getting bored with that, listening to some of the Kimochi catalog will sort of resolve that feeling because you really just never know what you're going to get with Kimochi. So I'm going to get started reviewing six records for you. And they're like in various styles and various genres. And like I said with Kimochi, it's very hard to nail down and describe even what you're listening to in most cases, which I think makes them so awesome. The first record I want to review for you today is by this artist named Kaiji. And it's on this, I always gravitate towards purple. I have to admit, purple's my favorite color. And it's on this really nice plum vinyl. And the track that I like on here is the February Summer song. It's basically Kimochi's take on melodic techno. It's got like a nice heavy pounding rhythm and a sweeping, long, drawn-out synth pad that really works to evoke an emotion in you. I find this record's a little bit tough to mix sometimes. Even though the track is somewhat straightforward in its arrangement, for whatever reason, I have a little bit of difficulty beat matching it, and that kind of brings me to another point about this label. If you're trying to make squeaky clean, perfect, technical, buttery mixes, this probably isn't the label for you. You have to be a little bit open to a little bit of lo-fi type rawness when you listen to these tracks, but they are stellar. My next pick for you is something that I initially almost categorized as dub techno in my head, but upon repeated listens, I really think it's just slow, deep techno. This track is by Airliner Series, and oh my gosh, I can't remember the guy's name. It's something like Nicky Lasso or something along those lines. But he has a few aliases that he produces under, and Airliner Series this is the only record that he ever put out. And there's two tracks on there that have like different Celsius temperatures as their name. And I went with the 12.9 as my pick for this just because of the slow, hypnotic bass that this track has in it. It comes in at about 116 beats per minute. But like I said, even though it's not dub techno, if you were playing a dub techno set and you wanted to kind of break out of the mold and go into something that fits into the set, but also most listeners would not have heard before, this would be a really good track. So like I said, super huge bass. You want to turn your subwoofer up on this. And I apologize, the bass probably isn't going to come through on your samples here, but check this out in real life. This thing rocks. My next pick for you is from an artist that I recently had like an affinity for. That I stumbled onto his catalog searching through Juno, and as I started to listen through it, I realized that all of his tracks sort of have this sleeper hit quality to them. And that artist is, if I'm pronouncing this correctly, I don't know, Conoley Ospovat. He's from the central US, I think in Nebraska. And he's just been real on the sneak, putting out records in the last few years, in some cases on Kimochi and in some cases on his own label, which is Continental Drift. But I found that you can pretty much buy anything out of his catalog, in my opinion, and be good with it. I think the tracks on here are like super stellar. They present that uniqueness of elements where it's like, man, I wonder where he got that little bit from, or I wonder where he got this piece from. And although I would say the central style is house-ish, you know, there's some tech house flavor, there's techno, and even though the tracks are relatively straightforward, it's very hard to pin down their genre. And the track that I like on here is the Love the Lights. Love the Lights. It's one of those tracks that you would want to listen to at maybe 3 in the morning, 2 in the morning, right as the night's starting to like really take off. And it's one of those tracks that basically takes the set from level A to the next tier up, right? It's one of those tracks that just feels like it's like creating momentum in the dance floor. And it's also one that you could kind of get lost in as a dancer and just sort of like hypnotize yourself as you're listening to this rhythm. I tried to kind of put a label on it. Maybe it's somewhere halfway between tech house and progressive house, but this is really smooth and dark and I love it. My next pick for you is another artist that I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly. I'm going to say Neotnas. Neotnas. I guess. This guy's really talented though. And on this EP in particular, this Neotnas brought a lot of diversity. The track that I gravitate towards here is actually a breaks track that plays at normal house tempo. So if you like to play every once in a while, drop some breaks into your house sets, this comes in around 123, 124 beats per minute. And the track is called Heavy Space of Soul. It's got a really nice retro, almost like mid to late 90s vocal sample. It's probably taken from some more popular 90s track, and just like a really nice pounding breaks rhythm where it's using drum and bass elements, but it's not really a drum and bass rhythm. It's pure breaks. But this has that 90s nostalgia in a way that is also still timeless, and I feel like this record is going to age really well. Somebody on Discogs pointed out that, man, if this track, all else being equal, were released on a label like Giggling, it would have blown up, because it kind of does sound like some of the DJ Metatron Tromprin's tracks where he goes into the breaks side of things. You could easily pass this off as a Metatron track, but because it's not Metatron, you can still go on Discogs and get this for like $12. And that kind of brings me to another point. The seller M50, for any of you guys that are looking through Kimochi's catalog on Discogs, the seller M50 is area. And I wanted to tell you, I've bought from him many times over the years, and I consider him to be a very reliable seller. One thing you have to note, he lists all of his records as VG. I'm assuming because he doesn't want to ever get into an argument with somebody over grading or condition. But when he lists something as VG, that's basically a new record. So if you see a $12 copy of one of the records that I just pitched in this episode, and you see it's it's VG, I don't want a scratched up record, it's actually going to come to you new. So M50 is area. He's really chill. I wasn't able to find a picture of him, but if he's as cool as his music is, he's got to be a great guy. My fifth pick for you here is an area record. It has a Donato Dazzi remix on it called the Genesis Chamber Mix by Donato Dazzi. It's almost like an industrial noise track, but that's not the track that I'm going to talk about with you here today. The one that I listen to the most on this record is called Through the Wall. It's like a 9-minute funeral type ambient song where there's epic, soaring, sort of life contemplating synths that are just sort of like rolling and real slow in the background. And it's not often that you'll see me talk about pure ambient tracks on here because I have ambient records, but I'm very particular about them. This one does it for me. I will say it's a nice clear vinyl. The copy I have is nice clear, really nice. I think this color is called Coke Bottle. The copy I have is a little bit crackly, but it's not pops. It's like just that type of crackle that you get when you cut an ambient record and the grooves are really thin, and just like any little bit of dust in there kind of dominates the sound. But I find it to be calming and relaxing, so take that for what it's worth. Still a really good record here. And my sixth pick for you, the final one for this episode, is Wawuwe, which is it's a Sebastian Muellert alias, and Sebastian Muellert, as you know, is half of Minolog, who I'm a huge fan of. I've talked about Minolog tracks in many of my previous episodes. This one's a little bit of a sleeper. I saw somebody finally wrote a review for it, specifically the track Silver Star on the B-side. This is one of Sebastian's better tracks. I'll admit he's been producing a lot in the last probably 4 or 5 years since Minolog broke up, and you have to be discerning because he's cranking out more volume at this point. This one's a good one. It's got a really nice deep hitting techno bass line, and it has that classic Minolog aesthetic where you feel like you're out in the woods and you're communicating with imaginary creatures. And although the vibe is weird in this track, it's not scary. So just kind of picture you're in a forest and and you're seeing things, and that's what this track is here, Silver Star. It has 2 pieces to it, basically 2 segments. You could have divided this out into 2 tracks if you wanted to. The first 9 to 10 minutes or so is with the beats and the deep bass line that I was describing. That just sort of does a radio fade into a more ambient section that continues for another 10 minutes. But classic Minolog journey, love it. And for $12-15, this is one of the best Sebastian records that you can get. All right, guys, that's all for today's episode. Area, if you're watching this, I love the music. I love the label. Thank you for the concept. Love the cover art. And to Conoley Ospovat, love your records, man. I have almost everything in your catalog, and thank you so much for the great tunes. That's all for today's episode, guys. Take care. Peace.